to today's event. I hope everyone can see the screen, which is on building teams, equity, and making the best of the university ecosystem. So we have two people from UC Berkeley, we have Chon Tang and Darren Cooke, who will talk to us a little bit about the resources that we have here and their experiences in building teams and equity. And we have Shri, who's a co-founder and CEO of Octant Bio, which is a startup in the Berkeley area as well. So we're very glad to have them here. Just a quick thing about what BPEP stands for. We like to foster entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit amongst the postdoc and graduate community within UC Berkeley to help them translate innovations that they've developed in the lab or into marketplace. And we do this with the idea to build and energize entrepreneurship as part of UC Berkeley's ethos. And thereby we have this community of people we can interact with and talk to and share ideas with, and maybe even have go on and form a company with, who knows. So the BPEP team was started by Naresh, who's here with us. And we also have Alex, who was a visiting scholar, and then he's continued to be with us and join us remotely, sometimes from Brazil. There are quite a few of us across UC Berkeley and Berkeley Lab who are on the board. And we've also had graduate students in the past. So if any of you here are interested in joining us and becoming a board member, please do reach out to us. We always welcome new people and like to interact with them. So yeah, so we're at pretty much was the end of our fall workshop series. So here we are at the November end. We have one last event to wrap up this year, which will be on virtualization of the startup enterprise and how to use resources all around the globe for it. And so without further ado, we're going to start off our session today. And first off, let me just stop share. So first off, we'll hear from Chon and tell you all about Chon. Chon is, he got his bachelor's here at Cal in electrical engineering and computer science. And he also has a master's in science from MIT. So he's an experienced Silicon Valley engineer, entrepreneur, and investor. And he's currently the founding and managing director of the Berkeley Skydeck. So he was also formerly the founding partner and managing director of Zunzi Capital Engineering. And that was a hedge fund that invested in the commodity space. He's been actively investing in Silicon Valley startups for over 12 years, and his personal investments is in over 25 deals with multiple IPOs and exits. And he remains an active member of multiple angel investing groups and serves in advisory boards of many VC-backed companies. And he loves meeting people, and he's worked with many companies through the Berkeley Skydeck. And so without any further ado, I want to hand it over to Chon and hear about his journey, his experiences, and what he has to share with us about building teams and equity and how to use the resources we have available to us in Berkeley. Thanks, Chon.
Thank you so much for the invite. I love the entire BPEP community, and I love the postdoc community that extends beyond that. And I think if there's anything that I can do to sort of encourage and foster more of you to join a early stage startup, I will be more than happy to do it. I think Radhika already gave a pretty good overview of my background, but I'll just kind of sort of complete the story by saying, I came out of MIT. So I guess I would say I'm a failed computer scientist because in the original .com bubble, I was just so infatuated by what felt like a rocket ship straight to the moon that I dropped out of my PhD program to co-found a company which failed almost immediately because it turned out that it wasn't a rocket ship, it was a bubble. But I learned a lot from that process. It reprogrammed my brain. For those of us who were at Berkeley at that time period, you compare the ecosystem that we saw then versus the one that we see now, and it's night and day. For most of my peers in EECS back then, the last thing that I thought of up all the way through probably my senior year was joining a early stage startup. It was just a concept that was foreign to me. All I wanted to do was go work at Microsoft or possibly Sun or maybe at Oracle. And it came as quite a shock the first time that I heard some of my peers, and the smartest ones, were actually choosing to turn down a job offer from Sun to not to start a company. I mean, that was a bridge too far. There were very few people that actually thought that far ahead, but we're choosing to join a company with 5 people or 10 people. And now you compare that to where we are now, where I think, you see kids that are coming in as a freshman having raised a couple $1 million. I mean, it's just it's a exciting time period. But certainly I would say I really enjoyed being part of that first wave that was brainwashed by the same mental framework that I think all of you now have in this room, which is by virtue of what's in your brain, by combining that with the appropriate amount of capital, it's actually possible to build a huge company, right? So again, now it's not a foreign concept, but back then it felt pretty insane. So even though my company failed, I'm going to talk about a bit more about that in a little bit. I definitely fell in love with the whole process. And as soon as I had some capital, I began to invest as an angel. I felt like I didn't have it in me to start a new company at that point in time, but I just knew that I wanted to be back in the room where people were building incredible companies. So I started doing that back in 2005 and 2006. Learned a lot in that angel investing process, because I was by far most of the people in the room with me were folks who had worked in corporate, who had sold companies, who were in their 50s and their 60s. I was in my late 20s at the time. But being in that environment, again, gave me a very different view of what it takes to really construct a company that's going to last for decades. And I think it was a very nice balancing act to sort of to more of the hype driven approach that I think I was initially bombarded with coming out of grad school. I was very entrepreneurial as well. So back in 2008, with the arrival of the financial crisis, I did launch and build that quant fund, which was placing trades in the commodity world. Did that for about 6 years, really enjoyed it. But also while I enjoyed very much the intellectual challenge and I enjoyed the financial rewards, it was not my true love. And it was the emotional burdens that came with that led me to realize that in 2014 or so, that it was time to make a change. I started a few companies, a couple of them are still going, but I really got back into early stage investments. First as an angel. So I started doing that very intensively, 2015, 2016, saw thousands of deals, made about 26 investments on a personal basis. And that brings me to the most current chapter, and I think the last chapter in my career, which is being the fund manager here at Berkeley Skydeck. Now, when I launched, when I was asked to build our fund here, and I think most of you have a pretty good grasp of what we do at Skydeck, and I'm certainly more than happy to kind of go into more detail. But I will just say, for starters, that when I was asked to kind of come in and help build a fund here, I approached it from the perspective of this will be a fun thing to do. It's something that combined my interests, both being a Cal alum, as well as being an early stage investor, as well as being someone who had launched and built a fund. I thought this would be fun. But at the same time, I did not have a great deal of sort of professional confidence that Skydeck would thrive. For those who are not aware, Skydeck, of course, was the official accelerator for the Berkeley ecosystem. And I think we're all familiar with that concept because there's one at every campus, not just in America, but probably across the globe. I think there's enough awareness of entrepreneurship now, and yet people are also aware that there's enough of a gap between what happens in the lab and what happens in the real world that we all want to build a platform where people can talk to each other and talk to accountants and talk to advisors and in the perfect world, talk to investors. So that's what Skydeck was, and it continues to serve in that role. But from a fund manager perspective, I wasn't convinced that we could build a platform that would be truly interesting. And that came from the perspective of I was skeptical that we could be unique enough that we could convince investors to invest their time and their energy here. Because if we were just a pipeline into Berkeley, that actually, if you think about it from a VC's perspective, from people who invest capital perspective, they're thinking to themselves, there are alternative platforms where I get a broader view, right? You can go to India Bio, you can go to YC, you can go to any number of early stage investment platforms where you're not getting just the best of Berkeley, you're getting the best of Berkeley and Stanford and Harvard and Georgia Tech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we really had to change that perception of what we do, and that's where things have gone. So for the last 4 years, we've been what we've built out is a platform where we bring in the best and the brightest from around the globe. So only about a third of the companies that we invest in each year comes from the ecosystem here in the UC, and two-thirds of them are global. They come from Europe, from Canada, from South Asia, and we do this in awareness of the fact that 7 billion people, 7 billion plus, don't work in the US, didn't go to school in the US, and just don't have sort of that ecosystem that all of us here in the Bay Area take for granted. And we wanted to build out our platform here, our ecosystem here, to help those folks get plugged in, hire, go to market, and raise. Okay, so that was a long story. I'll just wrap it up to give you a few quick facts about Skydeck and how we invest. So we do 2 batches per year. Each batch runs for about 6 months. In the most recent batch, we had about 1,300 companies apply. From 1,300, we picked about 20. We invest $200K into each of those companies. And in terms of stage, it's pretty clear. We want to be investing in companies that are about 6 months away from that first institutional round. Okay, so if they're coming in, they probably have not raised an institutional round, at least not here in the US. Prior, in the 6 months that they're here in Berkeley, we surround them with the advisorship, the customer base, and the insights that hopefully preps them. So when they quote unquote graduate from our program and they pitch in front of the hundreds of investors that we bring in, they're in a position where that story is now very, 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 very compelling. So we sit post a lot of the grants, we sit post SBIR or the Catalyst program, things along those lines, and we sit prior to all of the VCs. All right, I did prepare a few slides. Actually, if I could share, Radhika, because now I'm finally ready to go into the main topic, which is supposed to be about team building. Perfect. And I'll go through this pretty quickly, but I was asked to share a few anecdotes about things that matter. And I want to speak both from the perspective of a founder that's gone through this in a lot of ways, as well as an investor who's invested in a lot of companies at this stage. The first lesson that I really want to talk about, and this one is something that I feel strongly about, it's very intimate to me, really have to get prepared to embrace failure. And I think objectively, rationally, all of us understand the facts and the numbers. We all know that if we go down this pathway. So as I was saying, most of us in this room and most of the founders that think about this have had a professional career defined by not failing. We did well in high school where we wouldn't have gone to a great college. We did well in college where we wouldn't have gone to a great grad school. We did well in grad school where we wouldn't be a postdoc in a lot of your cases. And this was the case for my first company. I don't think that I had applied to a lot of things that I hadn't gotten, right? I think I had gotten an offer from every company that I had applied to, and I felt very much on top of the world. And when my company failed, only about 3 months into the effort, it was a visceral blow. It was shocking to me. It was so depressing that I spent probably 6 months not wanting to talk to anybody. I mean, thank God this was prior to the days of social media where I don't know how I would have been able to explain myself. But even back then, like I just shut myself off from all my peers and my family. So it was like, wow, everybody knew that I was going to build this company. I mean, everybody had heard my pitch and heard my predictions. And back then, I don't think we had quite as much knowledge of what the odds were. So I really felt like it was humiliating. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Now, what I'm going to ask is that now for a lot of the founders out there, failure is scary also perhaps for a rational reason. If you have kids, if the visa that you're on is currently tied to not failing, obviously these are things that you have to really weigh. But I think what I got from my experience was that so much of my emotional burden was irrational, right? It was the idea that I, who had not failed before, was now a failure. It was that social pressure that came from that. And what's been amazing for me was that having gone through that valley period, what I quickly came to realize was that 6 months later, I was still alive. My prospects were still alive. People were not going to judge me. They were not going to, my doors to career advancement and future professional success was not closed because I'd failed once. I mean, it sounds silly to say it now, but I think if you really dig down deep for a first-time founder, that's actually not intuitive to you. Okay, so really encourage you to confront and think about the irrational part of like, why am I afraid I'm going to fail? So many people are stuck in their labs or stuck in their corporate jobs just because of that fear. Okay, so think about that. I really encourage you failure if you can avoid the rational constraints on your career. Accept failure as the most likely outcome from your work, but don't shy away from it. You will grow from it. Your first start is likely going to fail. Your second one is likely to fail, but if you just keep at it once, twice, or 3 times the amount of experience that you accumulate is worth gold. Okay. And then my last point, just on the failure side, I really dislike the myth making that happens with successful founders. If you read some of the profiles in Forbes or the books that get written, you quickly walk away with a sense that some of these people are just brilliant, they're geniuses, and their success was always preordained, and there was some aspect of their personality or the technology or the project that they were working on that of course it was going to make it. Of course they were going to be a billionaire. But I can tell you with 99.99% confidence that all of them at some point in their career thought they had either failed or everybody smarter than them was convinced that they were going to fail, right? I don't care if we're talking about Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. These are all people that stared failure in the face and got past it. Lesson number 2, build a real world team. Okay. Most of the academic teams I've seen sort of stumble into a team. These are just the people that you knew, you worked on a project with them, they were your fellow postdocs, they were the PhDs, they were your PI, right? This was the truth in my first company as well. I was the only technical person, but I joined a group from HBS, from Harvard Business School, that were working on a project together. So it was like, of course, we're just going to be one joint team. But if you look at how repeat founders, especially ones that come from industry, pursue how they build a team, they do very intentionally. They don't go, oh, this is just a guy I saw, 5 times a week, and we brainstormed about it, and therefore we're going to go build a company together. To be intentional in thinking about what are the skills that we need in this company. And if we need it, it needs to be there. If it's not if it's not critical to the success of the company, don't bring it in, right? So the CEO, so I was the CTO, but the CEO of that company that I joined, that I co-founded back then, fired 4 of her her teammates. And I was shocked. I was like, what? Like, that's a thing? But in hindsight, although the company failed, clearly that was the right move, because you want to be intentional about the people you want to be involved with you. You really want people you want to be in a foxhole with. Okay. I've gone through this now multiple times. The kind of questions that I asked early on when I was picking a co-founder or a key hire, they're the typical questions. Hey, how would you solve this problem? Hey, who do you know? What do you know? 5 years later, what I really want are the people that on a personal level, I just trust implicitly with my career, with my life. Right? There's just a deep level of understanding where I know that everything that I have worked on is in her hands, in his or her hands, and I'm okay with that. And if there's someone on your team where you're sort of questioning that, it's like, well, yeah, I don't know that I want to be in a foxhole with him, but he's really smart. The answer to that is pretty easy. Go. Okay. There's a lot of smart people out there, but the ones who you want to face a failed funding round with or a lost customer with, that's the person that you want in the team with you on day 1. And then, of course, this part is pretty obvious. You want people with non-overlapping skills. I often see a team with three postdocs that came from the same lab that really feels like they know the same thing, and I realize that they all can contribute, but you want someone who can cover all of the gaps. You don't need an MBA. 99% of what they teach you in a business program is actually not critical to being a founder, but you need someone who can be a salesperson, someone who's comfortable with going out there and pitching the vision, not just doing the science. And ultimately, if you have someone that you're working with right now who's not a fit, please communicate it transparently immediately. See if there's a way to fix it, but if there's not, don't be afraid to end it. Okay. With every passing day, I've often heard, well, I'll wait until the seed round, I'll wait until the A round, and then I'll fix it because I don't want to look bad in front of our investors. I don't want to make it seem like I don't know what's going on. Believe me, every day that you wait, the worse it's going to get. So if you don't think this person's right, go fix it now. Lesson number 3, I really encourage you guys to build a startup experiment. Mentally, most of you are scientists, so this is a concept that should appeal to you. Don't build a product just because you would use it, right? Because that's built based on a sample size of 1. The bias inherent in that is so large. And in fact, I've come to the point where if I see a company pitch and I see a product and I get excited about it because I would personally use it, I actually pause myself and I go, wait, hold on a second, because this is not about me. It's about the market, right? So you really want to build a product that the world wants, not just what you or me on a personal basis use. Right? So I encourage our founders to design a series of experiments around on Google. It's actually an extremely easy thing to really do. Spend $1,000, run experiments on Google, you post ads for a product that doesn't exist yet, right? So all of you have a core tech, a core pain point that you think is a interesting company. Before you write a line of code, before you do one actual additional experiment in the lab, run some Google ads around different versions of phrasing your problem. Run an ad around different pricing points that you might be thinking about. It's not fraud because you're not going to take their money, even though the product, a lot of people are like, but I don't have that product. How can I build a website for a product that doesn't exist yet? You can do it. It's okay. It's okay. Just don't take their money. But what you get from the end of it is a concept of CAC, how much it's going to cost you to acquire a consumer. You're going to get a sense of the click-through rate, right? You're going to realize, oh, it turns out that I'm the only person that has this problem, but here's an adjacent version of the problem that apparently consumers love. So be curious about the end user, who is probably not you, should not be you, and talk to people in that category. And the furthest away they are from you, the better it is. And then finally, I think I've gone massively over time. I apologize for that. Be brutally fair on your cap table. Okay. Again, this is something I see a lot coming from stuff spinning out from the labs. It's innately, your instinct is who and who contributed a lot to the invention of this tech. And therefore, even though they're not really going to be involved on an ongoing basis, they should have X percentage of the company. That's not the way it works. Okay. If they invented this work as part of the work that they did in the lab at Berkeley, Berkeley owns the IP. That's it. That's the bottom line. We're licensing it. We have to pay some amount of payment. That's the extent of what someone should get for just being the PI. Investors are investing in your company not for the past. It's not like you didn't win a grant, you didn't win a prize that acknowledges you for what has come in the past. We're investing in you to join your journey into the future. So I want to know who's actually going to be contributing their energy over the next year, 2 years, 5 years. If you have a PI who says, well, this work was done in my lab, and therefore I want to own 50% of the company, we see that. And I will tell you that that is not acceptable, in my opinion, and that kind of company is not investable. Okay, so non-full-time people should get less than 15% of the company, and if they want more, they should leave their comfortable jobs and come and join you in the foxhole. That's it.
Thanks, John, for those lessons. I think we've learned a lot through those for sure. I'm going to pass on to Naren, who's going to introduce Sri, and then we'll come back to you during the question and answer sessions. a few things for you.
Yeah, super exciting and very profound, honestly, Chon. So here's a quick introduction of our next speaker, Sri Kosuri. Uh, he's a co-founder at Octant and an associate professor from UCLA on leave. Something that caught me about what he's done and is doing right now is how he's transitioned from the different spaces that we currently are and spans the entire things from scientist, faculty to founder. Uh, at UCLA, he was in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, where his lab worked to build large-scale ways of empirically exploring questions in protein biochemistry, human genetics, gene regulation, chemical biology, and he was previously also at the Weiss Institute and Harvard, where he built numerous technologies in gene synthesis, DNA information storage, gene editing, and large-scale multiplex assays. He helped build Gen 9, a gene synthesis company, as a member of the SAB, and was the first employee of Joule Unlimited, an engineered algal biofuel company. He's a Searle Scholar, new NIH innovator, and received his doctorate in science. And that's something I recently learned, Sri, which is not a PhD. It's specific for the STEM fields, from MIT in biological engineering and a BS in bioengineering at UC Berkeley. Excited to have you and looking forward to what you have to say.
Thanks for having me here, and it's nice to be a part of the Berkeley ecosystem again. So yeah, the SCD actually it's actually a funny story. It's mostly you get to pick from a drop-down list what your degree is when you graduate with a PhD or an SCD, and no one picks SCD, but you get to graduate first. And I wanted to get out of the graduation ceremony as fast as possible, so that's basically where that came from. I'll say, like, I really enjoyed my time at Berkeley. I think I probably overlapped with Chon a little bit. Like, I was there from 97 to 2001. And I think I was the first bioengineering major at Berkeley. The major, I was an engineering science major, which was this obscure major at Berkeley. And then the major started in my junior year there. And I had a great time. I went to grad school at MIT afterwards, kind of in the early days of this, like, systems biology and synthetic biology world. After MIT, I think, was a really special place at that time too. And afterwards, I went to help start a startup called, well, first I went to Flagship Ventures, which was a venture company, or is a venture company in Boston. They were experimenting with these ideas of, like, incubating companies with people that didn't know any better, like me, young scientists. And so I became the first employee of that company, kind of spinning it out of Flagship's offices. I was there for 2 years. It was really one of the best times I've had in science, and one of the worst as well towards the later ends. And I'm happy to expound on that. But after a couple of years, I went. George Church was one of the academic co-founders at Joule, and they were starting this new institute called the Wyss Institute, which was the idea of bringing back, a little bit like Skydeck in some ways, bringing back industrial talent into the academic world to help be more translational. I worked on DNA synthesis technologies, editing technologies, and like, kind of what turned into a lot of my academic career on large scale multiplex assays. Spun out a company out of some of that work called Gen 9 that was later acquired by Ginkgo Bioworks. And then and then I started a faculty position at UCLA in 2013. I didn't really have any intention to start another company other than to sit on SABs, but then after unsuccessfully trying to convince my students to drop out of their PhD to start Octant, I ended up starting it myself in 2017, really, really small. Started shutting down my lab, spent a couple of years making sure everyone had a good place, and then moved up to Berkeley in 2019, right before basically the pandemic started. So I've been here since. We're on the Berkeley-Emeryville border. We're a small molecule drug discovery company. A lot of the company revolves around very high throughput ways of doing chemistry and biology to build new drugs. And yeah, I guess, like, that's history of, like, kind of how I got here. Let's see. This is such a broad topic, and I definitely have talked about it before. There's, for folks interested on building culture and things, my co-founder and I did a blog post on how we built Octant's culture, and all I'll say is that it's just super, super hard to build culture. And I think, like, there's I remember reading. So just to go back, I started Octant with a friend, longtime family friend of mine, Ramzi Homsani. He had a long career. He was a bioengineer undergrad at Rutgers, and then we both grew up in New Jersey. He's married to kind of my cousin-ish growing up, Indian cousin, not actual cousin. Like, he after grad school decided on a lark to go to law school, and then started working for Wilson Sonsini, which is one of the big tech law firms. One of his first kind of interactions and he was first doing biomed and stuff, but one of his first interactions with a small company at the time called Google, decided to jump ship to Google in 2003, helped build a lot of the New York offices around there, kind of done on the legal side, but also on the business, commercial legal side. And then really saw the growth of that company, and then became one of the first adults in the room at Dropbox, and helped build like a ton of that company as well in terms of a lot of functions. And so was really a company builder. And I know there's a lot of things that I'm not good at as a scientist. And so we decided to, I don't know, it just seemed like a really fun thing to do with someone I trusted. And so, yeah, so in terms of building the culture, a lot of it is like, I want to build a place that I want to spend the rest of my career at. And that seems easy. And I think I was going to say one of the most influential things I read, we were trying to early on build this stuff. And then I read this, like, it was like some weird Harvard Business Review article on like everyone says they want the same things in a culture at a company. It's like they want innovative people, innovative project, like awesome people, innovative projects, flat structures, like all the, and this article was like, yeah, that is true. Like that's what everyone wants. Everyone says, why doesn't everyone do this? And it's because they all have like very hard consequences. Like you want to work with great people, that means you have to fire the bad people. Like you want to work on innovative projects, that means a lot of your projects are going to fail. Like you want a place that like, promotes from within and does all this stuff. Well, that means you're going to have a lot of bad managers, because managing is hard and most of those people never done it before, right? Like, and so like they all have trade-offs, and I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned is like, you kind of have to pick the end number of things that you want or are most important to you, and then stick with them, right? And your culture is ultimately the way you act. It's not like a set of principles that you might or might not believe in. Like most of those are, for all you, like we can all see the Berkeley principles and the strike that's going on now, right? So like, I do think that like, it's really what you do. There's this great book called by Ben Horowitz called What You Do Is Who You Are. If you get a chance to read that, that's a really great book on culture. And it's really like, it's like culture is really hard, right? And they're like, maybe I'll just name some examples. Like at Octant, what's our culture? Why are we different and compared to every other company? Like, how do we do things differently? And there's a whole bunch of them. Like, I'll say an easy one that seems easy, but it's not. Like, we believe in pay equity, right? Like, there's like, if you're doing the same job and you're like in the same area, like you should be paid the same. It shouldn't be matter that you're a better negotiator or you go search for a job every 6 months to like get a better like pay package, right? So so we're like, this is what we're gonna do. Like if you're starting as a scientist one, this is the salary. Like I can tell you what it is at Octant right now for like a molecular biology, right? And like there's like, and we think of it as like a pie. There's individual circumstances, of course. Like some people might like want more equity, and but what we do is make sure that they pay that off with like salary like trade-offs, or vice versa, right? Like some people are like, look, I need more cash, my kids are in daycare, like I just need like, and so we'll make those, that's like the individual slices of the pie change, but the size of the pie doesn't, unless that person negotiates effectively per se. Like say they maybe we've upped that scientist salary maybe 4 times in the last year and a half, because like scientist salaries have going up, and that comes from individual negotiations with people. But when we do that, we up everyone at the company at that level and just redo the salary lines. That sounds awesome, right? Like for the people inside the company, they're like, oh, I don't have to worry about like constantly like really demanding. It's really about performance and where I'm going. And it's not that we pay everyone the same. If you come in here and you kick butt and you're like doing stuff, you'll get paid more by like moving up in the company. And not even up and we don't have titles, for instance, at the company very early on. And over time that's changed too. And so, but broadly, like why it's problematic. Okay, so you have a really good person in your company. That person gets some insane offer from some other company because they just don't, they're willing to reach because they really desperately need like a synthetic biologist to run their synthetic biology program. And like we have a good like reputation in that community. So people like every worker at Octant is constantly getting recruiter calls, right? And they're like, we're going to pay you twice what you're making now, right? And I can afford that for that particular like point in time. Maybe it's like one person. It's not going to affect our runway. Might change it by like 3 days or whatever it is, but it's not really going to affect our runway. But that's the point in time where you have to be like, is this a real thing? Or is this like some quote on the wall that I put up? And like, and what you have to do in those moments is like really decide, like, are you going to like pay this person what they're worth on the open market? They just went and figured that out. Or are you going to like be like, yeah, that would be really unfair to like everyone else at the company, right? And like, what kind of behaviors do I want to build within the company? Do I want people to constantly be searching outside offers? Because the moment you do that, the moment everyone at the company knows, and they might not know the next day, but they'll know within a couple of weeks that like the most important thing they can do to get a raise is go get an outside offer. And so like, you know, you kind of have, that's a decision. Those decisions have consequences. That's your culture, right? There's an N number of those things. Like we do a lot of work on like performance reviews and career development, internal company. It's a ton of work every time people complain about it, right? Like, but like it makes us better. And like it's hard to be honest with people. And so what I do is like when my co-founder Ramsey, our performance reviews go up to the whole company and they're long. Like the first time I got a performance review from Ramsey, he does mine with the whole company. I do his with the whole company. And like, it was like 15 pages long. It was brutal, right? It was awful. Like I read it and I was so upset. I showed it to my wife and she was just like, yeah, you know, I agree with all of this. like Sharif makes a decision, forgets he made that decision, then argues with that decision 2 weeks later, or like any number of things, right? And like what we can do is like make a commitment to change the things that we can and mitigate the things that we can't. And like over time, that's a superpower. If you can get honesty within your company, it's awesome. Not everyone loves that, right? It's also hard when people aren't performing. You have to be honest about it, right? And so like these kinds of things are super hard. Most people avoid them, like, and you can decide if you want to or not. And like I think they both have pros and cons. Like we deal with all sorts of things that are of our own. Because we do this, it just leads to a lot more management burden, right? And so like anyways, I do think that there's a lot of things that are in this like bucket of culture, but it really comes down to how you practice what you do. And I don't think that's the same for every company, right? I could totally see the trade-off on the other way, and you know, we should just pay people market rates, and like it doesn't really matter what the internal like there are other companies that are like, yeah, just go get an outside offer and then we'll just pay you that, right? And that's another way to run the company, right? And so like there are different trade-offs for all of these things, and so I don't think there's one right answer. You kind of have to decide where you want to work and what you want to build. And if you don't do it intentionally, then the culture just becomes like an arbitrary set of decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis. And so like, so I think that's one big one. Equity, yeah, I think we try to be generous on that side, on the internal side. I think, you know, everything that was just said before, like, yeah, if you're not working at the company, you shouldn't get much equity. It's like there's advisor shares, you can do that, but like unless like there are a few, and I will say there are a few people in the world that you can like they can just command massive amounts of equity, right? Like you can, like if you're David Liu and you can own 25% of a public company without ever working there, right? Like so and that's more power to David Liu, but like, you know, for those that don't know him, he developed a lot of he just IPO'd a company called Prime where he owned 25% of the company at IPO. But like, you know, he is a very famous researcher at the Broad Institute, has developed a ton of companies. His name alone brings value. And so like, maybe there's an argument there. And so like, I think the bigger point is like, there's different types of cultures. Not any one of them is right. You kind of have to find and think about the ways you want to build your company. So I think that's point one. In terms of like how to think about equity and splits and stuff like that, I mean, I think there's, again, a million different ways to do that. I think generally co-founders should be pretty equal. Otherwise, they're not really co-founders. And I think especially your first and early employees, like try to be as generous as you can. We did things where we gave much larger grants, but we did them over 6 years. I really appreciate that now, because like a lot of our early people are still here and they're still doing great. And I'm glad, like that's the big, like the early grants that you give are going to be the biggest things you can possibly ever give to those people, because every other refresh we can do now pales in comparison to that grant that we gave them, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. Let me think. And then we just continue to pile on equity on the stars internally to the company. I don't know. I think we can talk about a lot of different things. Maybe I'll just leave the rest of the Q&A, but I think overall, like I would just say set the culture up to be the place that you want to work at long term, and think about what that is and like the places you experience and the types of values you care about, because you're not going to be able to live up to most of your values, quite honestly. Like there are going to be things at the company that you build that you're horrified happened at your company. Right. And that will undoubtedly be true, and your culture will change. Like it has to change. Like as like we're in this phase now where really growing quite a bit over the last like 6 months. We just did our Series B. We're moving towards the clinic. Like there's a lot of change that has to happen. Like early on, we were a very tech-focused company, and one of the challenges now is moving that into this way. It's like, oh, there's patients on the other side of this. Like there are drugs that are going to go into people very soon. And so I think culture has to change, and it will continue to change. And but early on in a company, again, Ramsey has a saying that I think he borrowed from somewhere else. Like there's honor in delaying the inevitability of what will come, right? Like we're eventually all going to have titles at the company. Right now, we only, originally we didn't have any titles. Now we have titles at the VP level, kind of. But that's it. Internal company, there's not a lot of it. But eventually we will. Eventually that's going to happen, but it doesn't have to happen now. And so there's a lot of things that you can push off. You don't have to be like, I don't know, Cisco from day one, right? And it would be terrible for you to do that. So I wouldn't like build your culture to be something that's much, much bigger than yours, because like there's real benefits of having a culture that's really nimble and flat and exciting and fun. But it will inevitably change, and it has to change. Otherwise you'll die before you reach like any kind of impact. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Shri, may I ask you to plug in something else? I think because most of the people here are thinking about a startup, and you built a startup and you actually moved from UCLA and people followed you as a leader, right? What are a couple of things that you did right that they all trusted you and moved here, and they continue to stay with you? It's important, right?
Yeah, I'd say like maybe, and every situation is different, right? Like we only had 10 people or so at the time. But one of the things we made very clear very early on is that we don't know where we're going to be long term. And it's either going to be LA or San Francisco. Because my co-founder, Ramsey, was flying in, like he basically would spend like week on down here and week up there. He was based out of the Bay Area because he had been at Dropbox, and his wife, my cousin, was there. So we knew that one of us was going to have to move. I think we both said, like, very early on, we told every employee, like, this is what was going to happen. We were going to make this decision if we could raise a Series A, and we were able to. And then we like sat down and said, like, we're going to try to make the best decision for the company. I think at the time we weren't anticipating a pandemic, which would send everyone virtual, virtual, and like all this, like the whole world changed in 2020. But in 2018, 2019, when we were making this decision, we didn't know that was going to happen, or 2018. And so for us, it felt like what was best for the company, and a lot of what we wanted to build was small molecule chemistry, which is harder to do in LA. LA has Amgen and places like that, but like not a lot of talent around small molecule chemistry. And we just really wanted to like build that out, and also like thinking about like, business and executive, like it just seemed like Bay Area was the better place to build it. And then we kind of like, well, I can't afford to live in San Francisco. Like, I don't know who else can. And so I think finding the East Bay was a big thing. Like, hey, there's a place like the East Bay has livable, like it wasn't, I know it's still expensive, but it's like LA expensive. It's not like San Francisco expensive, right? So like, there are places in LA, like it was similarly cost wise, we thought we could handle that. And like, and so once we kind of made that decision, we communicated that to the company. And luckily, like most people decided to move. We felt like it. I think part of that has to go with like giving people this like knowledge that was going to happen, even though that probably freaked a lot of people out. Even though we lost some people, that was like, I can't make a decision until you guys make a decision. So we definitely had that, and you have to be willing to like be honest with that up front. At least I think that's what helped a lot, because they knew that this decision was coming, and most people didn't agree. Most people loved LA way more than the Bay Area, but despite that, we're willing to like kind of move up. We did lose one person whose partner was a professor at UC Irvine and couldn't move, but like ultimately we thought it was the best decision for the company.
Great, thank you.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Shri. And in the interest of time, we're going to get started with Darren. We'll ask Darren, and then we'll come back to you with questions, because yeah, we have a few more lined up. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Darren. He got his bachelor's as well as master's in mechanical engineering from Berkeley. And he also worked developing cochlear implants at UCSF. He then got a JD from Columbia Law School, and he worked as an attorney and led the IP legal team for the Life Science Tools Group of Bio-Rad's laboratories. And then he was a life science patent litigator at Covington and Burlington. So Darren is currently the executive director of the Berkeley Life Sciences Entrepreneurship Center. He's also a professional faculty at the Berkeley Haas School of Business, and he also chairs the bio track at the Berkeley Skydeck Startup Accelerator. He teaches entrepreneurship at Berkeley Haas, and I don't know, maybe if you follow him, you'll see a lot about his Berkeley Changemaker courses. And he also teaches at the I-Corps program for the National Institutes of Health and NSF. He's an investor and a former chair of medical device and digital health at Life Sciences Angels. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Darren to share his insights.
All right. You just see the slides, right?
We do. We see the first slide.
All right. Okay, cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Radhika. Thanks, Ramesh. It's great to be here. Great to meet you all. I'll admit, so when Radhika asked me this, I focus on making the most of the university startup ecosystem as part of the title, because that's what I do now as part of my new center, is really pulling together the startup ecosystem. One of the elements of what I do has to do with team building and matchmaking and that sort of thing. So I'm going to focus on that a little bit at the end. But first, if you'll permit me, I would like to run through a little bit about just what is my center, why it came about, and what we do, and then land with the team building stuff. So going way back in time, this is actually even after I was here. As Radhika mentioned, I was at Berkeley in the mid-90s, presumably getting a PhD in mechanical engineering before BioE was formed, Tony Keaveney's orthopedic biomechanics lab. I quickly knew as soon as I was going in that that's not what I wanted to do, and then I left to go to law school. But this is what it looked like 22 years ago, right? We had a little bit, mostly it was around the business school. 2005, more stuff coming in to support innovation and entrepreneurship at Berkeley. 2010, 12 years ago, there was quite a bit. And you can see it just keeps growing. And then what in the world, right? So this is comprehensive. And if you go to the Begin website, begin.berkeley.edu, this is the comprehensive list. And it was becoming so complicated and so busy that it was determined that we needed somebody to tame the mess, if you will. And so in the beginning of 2020, we hired from the business school, the former dean of Berkeley Haas, the business school on campus, Rich Lyons, to become the first chief innovation and entrepreneurship officer for the campus. And his task is to try to make sense of this. So he's been around now for 2.5 years. Fantastic job. Think about, of all these, how many of them are life sciences focused? And I've focused on maybe these, probably a bunch of logos you recognize. This is basically my view of where anywhere in the ecosystem where life sciences innovation could be found, where bio startups could be being formed. And so the inspiration behind my center, as Radhika mentioned, the Life Sciences Entrepreneurship Center, it's in Rich Lyons' office, is to do the same thing that Rich does with respect to taming the broader ecosystem, but just in the life sciences space. So this is my world. And the original plan was pretty simple. We're just hey, how about we had somebody who just worked between and with all these different organizations to make sure they're not duplicating efforts and make sure they're working together, and we could do joint events. And that was about what we came up with in the beginning. We launched the Life Sciences Entrepreneurship Center with that mission in the middle of 2021. This is funded by a gift from Mark Robinson, who is an investment banker at Centerview, from David Kern, who's the CEO of 4DMT, a public company in Emeryville. It's an unusual sort of center that has a particular term and a particular budget. And if we don't get this replenished, then it goes away, but it's around for at least the 5 years. And as mentioned, it launched just last summer. And it is pulling together the best of the biotech ecosystem at Berkeley. You can see here the advisory board really pulling from every corner of the campus, again, where bio innovation, life sciences startups are being formed. And I put on my own website, lsec.berkeley.edu, what I think of as being the most important life sciences startup resources at Berkeley. And so if you go to this website, you'll find a tab on the page where you can browse this list at your leisure and click through, et cetera. Also, I want to point out part of what the goal of my center was to just be sort of a resource also, that I can talk to people one-on-one and advise them one-on-one. I've been around the university for a while now because I've taught at Haas since 2017. I've run the biotrack at Skydeck since 2018. And so if you're interested in having a live chat with me, there's a link on there where you can just book time on my calendar. So highlight a bit of the bridge building, because this was the original idea. Like, wouldn't it be great to have these different resources actually talk together and work together? And it's working. So, Berkeley Skydeck and the new Baker Bioengineering Hub don't dislike each other. It's just that they would not in the past have had any sort of reason to know or talk to each other. What my center is doing is making these things happen. So you can see here we had a big event last spring where the new biotrack teams from Skydeck came and met the Baker Labs tenants over a fun happy hour. And this is just happening dozens of times a year now. But the thing that sort of surprised me was when I set up the center, doing a bunch of customer discovery myself to understand where the needs were in the system, was that there were other things that were not being addressed that could be addressed that I could also tackle. And some of these things include 4 times a year, I run a special version of the I-Core program. I'm going to highlight this because the applications are open currently at the moment. The next session is early next month. It's just a couple weeks away. It's in the evening. It's a Monday, Wednesday, Monday course. It's on Zoom. We have room. I'm doing a special session for the IGI fellows at the beginning of December. So 3 of the teams are already set, but we have room for 5 more teams. So if you're interested in a rigorous market needs finding program, I encourage you to check it out. And I'll point out, Naresh just went through this with his own new startup recently. Also open at the moment, I run a venture fellows program for PhD students and postdocs who are interested in venture capital and entrepreneurship. This is, you can see that the group that's gone through so far, the ones up in the upper left are our current fellows. We basically introduce them to VCs, entrepreneurs, make them do a bit of customer discovery themselves on different target areas within the university, what companies have come out of the system. But crucially, the fun stuff is now they do some innovation mining and actually look for what could be coming from labs at the university. But as promised, there is a team building element to this as well. And Radhika just went through this program because you can see here, it was just a couple of weeks ago. Another thing, the inspiration was during the customer discovery when setting up LSEC was that there was so much need. I consistently heard from PhD students, postdocs, they're like, hey, I've got this idea and I think it could be commercializable. But what do I know about business? There must be somebody at Haas who could help me, right? And I kept hearing this again and again. I'm like, yeah, there's probably somebody at Haas who could help you. I don't know. So we thought, how about we do this sort of speed dating event with people with ideas, matching them with people with skills, just broadly defined, no sort of curation to the whole thing, other than just like maybe you'd like to meet each other and maybe some magic will happen. And indeed, so we run it like this, 10-minute meetings right after each other on Zoom. And I tell people up front, it's like, what, half of these meetings are probably going to be total duds, right? Because I'm not trying to do anything special. I don't think that Naveen and Mika have anything in common, but maybe they do, right? And so we put them in. And what's surprising, this is the 3rd time we've run it. It really, first of all, it's popular. You can see the net promoter score at the bottom. Second, look at all the follow-up meetings people plan to have. Most of them plan to meet with 4 or more other people, or 4 or more participants after the speed dating event happened. And it works. At the very first event, Julian Reese, who a postdoc at the Berkeley Labs, who I had to talk into this because he had this idea and he wanted to start a company. I'm like, hey, come to my speed teaming thing. It's going to be super fun, even though we've never run it before. Who knows? It just happened that Hannah Weber, who was an MBA student, signed up to do it. They had a business love connection, as it turned out, and they really hit it off. They did the I-Core program the very next month. They went through the PAD 13 program at Berkeley Skydeck, and they started a company. So they're actually off and raising a substantial round at the moment. And so with that, I just want to highlight something else that's currently open. You just heard about market needs finding and putting teams together and pulling together different resources on the campus. This is just launched. And so this is in partnership with Skydeck and other resources on campus, where we really are proposing to build companies with the resources that we have. And you can see here, there's substantial funding. In exchange for the substantial funding, we require these newbie companies to go through and take advantage of all the resources that have been proven consistently to be super valuable. So Catena, Accent, a bunch of examples of companies that have come out of Berkeley academic labs have all used each of these resources, and now they're all taking off. So the bet here is that if we find these, give them a bit of money, give them a bit of support, make them do the programming, that we're going to build something really interesting. The applications for this program are open until January 8th. I'm running an information session live at Haas on November 29th, which is a Tuesday night at 5 p.m. Anyone who's interested in learning more about this, I would suggest that you, first of all, go to the lsec.berkeley.edu website. You can read much more about it. If this is interesting to you, then sign up for the information session and we'll go from there. All right, that was a quick blast through what I see as my world.
And that was great. Thank you for sharing all of those different resources. I think they're going to be useful for everyone out here. And yeah, we'll follow up. Probably we'll send out the slides or something if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, we want to open up the floor to questions to all of those who are here. If any of you have questions, y'all can go forward and you unmute yourself, ask them straight off. We do have a few prepared, so we can ask them right after you go. So we have 10 minutes and we want to be cognizant of everyone's time here. So yeah.
All right, I'll go off with one question. So if you're trying to found a company with a faculty there, and equity issues come up, how does one negotiate those things? Say a faculty says like, we have 3 co-founders, 2 postdocs and 1 faculty, and let's split it 3 ways. And for that person, he or she appears fair. How do you push back if the professor is not willing to give the company, the lab and come join the company? Chon is laughing, so
Right.
I guess I'll take a first stab at it. I mean, like it's not an easy conversation to have, and I don't know that I have a magical cure. But I think what has worked for a lot of our companies, I mean, and we've had to adjust a lot of the cap tables that come into our program. We just explain to them that this is not fundable. You know, I mean, they usually, we don't see this with non-first-time founders because they've gone through this before, they understand it. It's usually only the first-time founders that go through it, and we just explain to them what we see in the venture world. They don't always believe us, and they'll go around and they'll ask more VCs, and then out of self-interest, the faculty member will usually get it. But sometimes they don't. I mean, you know, they've been in the tower for their entire careers, and they've been first author on lots of papers at Science and Nature, and sometimes it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, Chon, how many companies did we have to go back and renegotiate the cap table for? At least the bio companies that I saw, there must have been 2 or 3.
It feels like more than 50%.
Most of them. Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
most of
Like
them.
it seemed like every one of them were like, oh, this cap table's messed up. And then
Yeah,
for-
most professors don't have a good understanding of what building a startup is. They overvalue the early idea. I think most founders do too, for that matter.
Yeah.
And that's a common mentality. And like, you know, I think it's generally a problem. I mean, it's generally a problem amongst founders too, right? Like if there's just general points, like everyone should vest, right? And then people that don't want to commit yet, they vest based on a percentage of their working time, right? So if they're willing to put in 1 day a week in the early stages, yeah, like sure, we can be equal co-founders, but you said you would leave. Like I myself didn't vest until I left full time at my own company that I started, right? Knowing that but I had been in startups before, and so like I know that like that's important, and I think you just can't build a company any other way. I think there's like exceptions to this rule, and I think that's where a lot of faculty get it, which is like in a place that's not founder driven, like meaning it's VC driven. And there's a lot of these in bio. So if you look at like the Third Rocks and the flagships and like they're just like made totally differently. Like the VC company owns most of the company. Like all the early employees are just employees of that company, right? They don't have founder shares. The board is really dominated by the venture capital firm. And then they'll do things like here's 10% of the company, but like that company gets built very differently. Like there's very large dilution rounds. Those are really like they're completely decided by the venture firm. And so like they've figured out how to like organize those in ways where there's a founder who's like literally just an SAB member or an advisor. And so you see all these big biotech companies getting started where like, George Church is the founder. He was my postdoc and the grad advisor. Like they're great. Like I think they're really valuable in all sorts of ways, but ultimately like they're not building the company. And if you're not building the company, then that's a different thing. It's like, and so I think it depends on what model you're in. I think everyone here is very interested in being a founder and a founder. Then if you want to build that kind of company, your advisor can't literally have it. And in bio, they have this other option, which is like things in bio often get built differently. And that's probably where you see it from.
So I wanted to say, like, I really like the idea of just making vesting part of the conversation, you know, because it sometimes it feels like it's so, if I get X percentage, you're getting 100 minus X, you know, and it becomes a very challenging conversation to have sometimes. But if you make it around vesting and actual contribution, I feel like that might be easier, you know, for you to say, okay, sure, you can have 50% of the company if, as you say, you're going to leave your tenured position in 6 months, and we'll just agree that when that happens, that's when the vesting starts, you know, like there's ways of crafting it in such a way that it's not so concrete. I'll give one more example of a company in this current cohort, actually, where when we initially pushed back on the cap table, because the two full-time co-founders had only, like, you know, half the company, actually had less than half, and 3 not full-time people who were, you know, inventors of the tech own more than half. We're like, that's not going to make it. They initially pushed back because they're like, oh, but we talked about this a year ago and everyone was really firm and this might be a deal breaker. It turned out that they went back, and the second time they had the conversation a year on, the non-involved people actually agreed, because it had now been a year and they realized they weren't contributing, and then the 2 full-time people really were contributing, and they agreed to adjust. So I think, you know, the cap table can be fixed, but you guys should communicate about it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think we thought that was not likely to happen. It's surprising that they did fix it.
I had a quick question, if that would be okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So I had a question regarding company culture. So establishing company culture is in and of itself a challenge, but then once you do, how do you sort of keep that company culture like real, where when push comes to shove, because company culture is easier to manage when everything's great, you're getting tons of revenue and everyone's like getting paid whatever they're supposed to, and there's no sort of hard decisions being made. But when you're in a downturn like we are right now in like larger companies or something like that, what is your North Star to make the right decision that is in line with your company culture, such that your employees don't feel that, hey, the company culture was only there as like a facade, but then now that we're like short on cash or something like that, it's now breaking down?
I mean, I make an argument that, like, and many people do, that your culture isn't like, do you provide a free lunch, or like, do you have gym membership? That's not culture. Those are perks, right? And the culture is the hard decisions that you make. That's determined by you. And so you have like, that really determines what the culture is. Is this a great place to work? Like, most people actually don't care about all the other small things. Like, I would say most people actually don't even care about their salary. They don't. They just want to know that they're not a sucker, right? And that you're paying the next person over like a little bit more because they negotiated more. And it makes zero difference, but it makes all the difference in the world in terms of what the culture is about, like fairness, right? And so, like, and you have to decide like how you want to play that. Like, if someone comes and asks you, like, company culture gets decided by the way you organize your decisions. Is it who has access to you? It's like, hey, like, this happens to me all the time, where someone at the company will just be like, can we do this thing? And I'm like, I'm not going to make a decision right here, because if I did, then basically every decision has to be like, who comes to me, who has access to me, who's comfortable enough to ask me a question, rather than just being empowered. It's like, oh, can we put this on, like, lunch on the company card? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you think we should put the lunch on the company card? Right? I think it's really about that. It's like, who makes decisions? How do decisions get made? A lot of culture is built that way. And so I think ultimately what's really not intuitive is that's what the culture is, right? And so when people complain about stuff, and maybe they're rightfully, it's usually because of some other thing. It's not because of like, oh, our snacks this week are like really bad, or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think like my question more has to do that does make sense for a lot of things. I think it's more so like right now there's a lot of companies that kind of had like really great culture, and they paid their employees like X minimum wage or something like that, and then now that profits are down significantly, and now they're not doing that anymore, and it's like, oh, so like the company wasn't really real. It's like it almost
you're
feels like it was
what they're
there
paid
to
with the culture,
recruit.
right? In that sense, right? So I'd say, like, if the company culture is about they're super highly paid, and that's no longer the case, they're no longer highly profitable, then yeah, the company culture is dead, right? And so, like, you've made the company culture about how much we're paid, rather than like,
Like some
Things.
underlying thing. Yeah.
But I do think, like, look, we've had a ton of tough conversations. Like, if, for those of you that don't know, most of tech and biotech is going through one of the hardest things since probably 2001. It's bad. It's going to get worse. Like, if you haven't, like, there's 100,000 people laid off in tech alone in the last week or two, right? So, like, it's getting bad, and like everyone should be having those conversations. And yeah, like I had that conversation. I was like, you know what? We're not buying new equipment anymore. Everything's we're going to get is from auction. Like, and if you haven't looked through, like, we do that stuff all the time, and it's like, oh, like you can ask the question of like, oh, maybe my time is not valued anymore because like I should be able to buy whatever I want, right? If that's what a person thinks the culture is, then like they're going to be kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like you
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
figure out who you are in these kinds of times, right? As a company, and
You know, if I just touch on it real quick on the idea of culture. You know, I haven't read the book that you just history, and I really like it. So I it's on my to read list now. But the way that I've defined culture is for my companies, and I built some decent size ones, is really around, do we have a shared framework on how we make decisions on things? You know, when you have a team of 5, it's actually culture is very easy because you just all sit around and you talk about it and you have a shared framework. But when you get to 50, 500, 1,000, decisions are made every single day on a decentralized way, right? Like, hey, this customer wants this employee wants that. What do? Do we just all have another vote by the management team? That's not the way that it works. The culture is the frameworks that everyone goes, oh, no, I know that at our company, we would react to this customer's complaint this way, because this is just how we are. And I think this goes back to your question about like the cutting in compensation, right? Like if the framework has always been, we want to have our employees succeed in order for, if that's how we get our company to succeed, but now times are tough, therefore employees will have to tighten their belts. Like, I think people will get that. But if your culture was always around, we don't really think of it that way, we just hire people because they're the best person right now for the cheapest cost, and then when you cut, problems will happen.
So more like core values as like guiding principles rather than any specific thing.
Yeah, like sort of abstract core values, because you know, people have 10 bullet points, that's their core values. Great, that's easy to memorize. In my mind, the culture is all the amorphous things that go beyond just those concrete things, and it's all of the abstract things. I'm trying to balance customer A and customer B. They're both pissed off right now, and I only have, you know, I can only solve one problem at a time. Which one am I going to solve? Like those sorts of decisions, the framework that you use to make that decision, I think that as your company culture.
Thank you.
All right, in the interest of time, and to be mindful of everyone's precious time, thank you so much for this session. Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Chon. It's been wonderful talking to all of you and getting your insights. And thank you for those book suggestions too, Shri. That's going to be really useful. So with that, we'll say bye, and we look forward to seeing and meeting y'all in the future in-person events. And hi, Naresh.
Yeah,